Hello everyone and welcome to Cine 103, History of Motion Pictures beginning to 1945. We are up to class 5. This is our first class in the talkie era or the sound era. And I will probably say this a couple of times, but sound came in relatively fast from its first film, The Jazz Singer, in 1927. By about 1930 or so, nearly all Hollywood movies were talkies, as they called them. Color, on the other hand, the first color films came in 1932, 1933, and there were still black and white films in the 1960s with the Beatles' Hard Day's Night and Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove and Walt Disney's The Absent-Minded Professor. So there's still plenty of movies in black and white 35 years later. So color, 35 years, sound, 3 years. Okay, so a big change. And this class today would be the second half of class 5. And if we were in the classroom, we would have taken the first test for about the first hour or so of the class. And then we would do the Gangsters, and we'd have some clips and stuff. So this isn't quite a full class worth. Okay, now online, you probably watched class 4 a little while ago and then took the test. But in the classroom, this would have been the second half of the 5th class. And that's why it's a little on the short side. And that's fine. I'm sure you don't have any problem with that. So we have talked about some studios sort of being identified with certain genres, and Warner Brothers is going to be identified with gangster films, and later on we will get up to Universal, and they are the horror studio, and MGM will be identified as the musical studio. Now other studios were doing musicals and gangsters and all that, but they really dove in, especially in by the 1930s. They really were specializing. And I like to think of the studios as a team, and I'm sure they do too. And if you have a team with a great quarterback, then of course you want to get good receivers. And if you have a team with a great running game, and so on. So that's kind of what the studios are doing. If they're going to start making gangster movies, then they're going to get actors who can play gangsters, and they're going to get women who can be in these movies, and they're going to get lots of other people who are going to work in that genre really quite well. Actors that can play cops and other gangsters and all that. And the same thing for horror. They're going to have actors who can play horror movies quite well, and you will see them just like a team in film after film after film. Some actors play butlers in the comedies, film after film, and that's the way it was at studios. They had a team. They had the team would be under contract, okay, just like a sports team. This is the studio, and the same thing for musicals. People who could sing and dance and all of that. Warner Brothers actually did a little bit of both. They did a lot of really great musicals with Busby Berkeley directing. And so, interestingly, Jimmy Cagney, who does a great gangster, also was a singer and dancer. You wouldn't think that that would be the case. The same guy starring in musicals and in gangster movies. But in Cagney's case, we actually have that. So that makes it kind of fun. So anyway, Warner Brothers, the gangster studio, and there are 3 main films that we're going to talk about today. Little Caesar is the first one, and then we've got a couple others. We've got Public Enemy and Scarface. The first one, Little Caesar, starring Edward G. Robinson as Caesar Enrico Bendello, and so they will call him Rico and Little Caesar. And this is really the first big hit. I don't think it's the first gangster movie, even of the sound era, but it is a big hit. It's based on a book, and you have a hit. That's the way Hollywood works. If you have a hit, get some more, right? Do that again. Have more gangsters. Put Edward G. Robinson in another gangster movie, and find some other actors who can do gangsters, or the gangster's girlfriend, or the cops, or any of that stuff. You quick reassemble your team and put out more of these gangster type movies. So I've linked to 3 or 4 scenes from Little Caesar, and what you might do is, and I keep saying this every class, so I don't know why I keep saying it, but if you want to, you can stop this part, this PowerPoint slide lecture, and go and watch some of the films. And like I say, I've got about 3 links to Little Caesar. Before you do that, let's take a look at the original. There's Al Capone, and as we can see, there is a resemblance, sort of the high forehead and round face and all that. Scarface, also, right? So he's going to play Scarface, and Al Capone. We've talked about him with Prohibition and all that a little bit in the 1920s, a couple of classes ago, 2 classes ago, and he was a larger-than-life figure. He liked the press and the media. Most people that are doing gangster-type activities sort of like to stay in the shadows, but Al Capone, he liked being in the spotlight and maybe in the newsreels and talking to the press. He had many layers. That's kind of the way crime works. Most people doing crime, whether they're businessmen or gangsters, have 3 or 4 subordinates under them. So when the feds go to track down, where did the murder come from, or who stole the money, or whatever, it's 3 or 4 levels down, and the people doing the crimes probably never even met Al Capone or some of the other people, on Wall Street or anything like that. He is going to tell one of his top lieutenants to tell somebody to tell somebody. And the guy that does the shooting or the killing or the stealing or the whatever probably never met Al Capone, and that makes it really, really tough for the feds to track him down, right? When they capture the guy and say, who's your boss, who told you, they have what they call plausible deniability. Okay, so it's hard to track these guys down. A lot of times, the way they capture people, bad guys, are especially dealing with money. Okay, especially dealing with money, not with violence and things like that, but especially dealing with money. They catch them for not paying income taxes. If Al Capone is going to steal lots and lots of money and make lots and lots of money from bootlegging alcohol, he's got to show where his income came from. You can't live in a big house and drive a big car if you can't show that you made income. And he can't really show that he's making all that much money from his nightclubs or from his, olive oil business or whatever he was doing as a cover. And that's the plight of the gangster. And interestingly, if you ever watched Breaking Bad, Walter White, sort of the good guy gone bad, and he was making lots and lots of money, and he was smart enough to know that he couldn't just grab hundreds of thousands of dollars and go buy a new house or cars or anything like that. People would be suspicious. So Walter White was a smart guy, and so were the writers, and they had him have a cover business. I think it was a car wash, so that he could sort of account for some of the money that he was making, because he can't just take a suitcase full of money and go throwing it around. People are going to get suspicious. So anyway, Al Capone and some of these other people, other gangsters, that's really one of the main ways that they get busted by the feds, is taxes and tax evasion and all that. It's never for gangsterism. So our next one, there's Jimmy Cagney, and what a great star, and a big star in Hollywood for many years, 30s, 40s, and 50s into the 60s. He was still acting. He could, drama, comedy, action, musicals, really, he could do it all. And here he is playing Tom Powers. And that's one of the things they did in the films back in the 1930s. They knew the gangsters were mostly Sicilian and so on, but In some cases, actually there were Irish gangsters too, and there were Jewish gangsters too. But a lot of times they would be given these sort of nondescript names and so on. There was a time, I think in the 50s in television, whenever they wanted to do gangsters, they would give them like Greek names and Hungarian names and all that. And it was sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody knew that they were supposed to be, Italian gangsters and mafia types and so on, but they just couldn't really come out and do it. I guess there was pressure from some organization or another. Anyway, The Public Enemy, wonderful film directed by William Wellman. Wild Bill Wellman. He really was a wild guy, kind of a tough guy. He fought in World War I and was a pretty action kind of a guy. And so we've got a couple of really wonderful scenes from Public Enemy. These are all great movies to watch for your assignments, for your papers, by the way. They're not hard to track down, so you might think about one of these films. And Jimmy Cagney, there he is. This is a rather famous scene at the breakfast table. That's a grapefruit. And she just says the wrong thing to him, right? She's his moll, M-O-L-L. She's his moll, and she suspects that he's got other girlfriends and things like that, and says the wrong thing, and he smashes it in her face. It's violent, it's awful, it's ugly. It's not like he hit her with his fist, but it's just really still very ugly when he does that to her. So we see Jimmy Cagney, Public Enemy, and then a musical, Footlight Parade. He won his Oscar in a musical, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and then some other tough guy stuff, Whitey's, wonderful, Roaring Twenties, G-Man, G for Government. So after a little while, instead of playing gangsters, they have a lot of these actors playing G-men, federal types and stuff, when the production code changes and stuff, and they don't want to keep cranking out too many of these gangster movies. And there were an awful lot of gangster movies in the early years. I think it's like 50 or 60, maybe I've got the number up here somewhere, but there were an awful lot of gangster movies being made in a very short period of time. Like I say, Hollywood, if they see a winning formula, okay, like a hot hand with the dice, they're going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling until it doesn't work. And right now, we see there are a lot of superhero movies. It's a winning formula. They tend to make money at the box office. And, 20 plus Marvel movies, not to mention the DC movies, and X-Men movies. I guess X-Men is Marvel, but Avengers movies, all that kind of stuff. So we're up to probably somewhere in the 30s of superhero movies, maybe even higher, probably 40s or 50s when we go back to the Superman and Batman movies of the 70s and 80s. And they work, right? So Hollywood knows they work. It's a winning formula and almost a guarantee, not quite, but almost a guarantee at the box office. So Hollywood learned that lesson way back in the 30s with gangster movies and musicals and horror and things like that. Okay, next. Probably the best of these three movies, Scarface from 1932. That's Paul Muni there, and this is directed by Howard Hawks. We are going to see more Howard Hawks, a very versatile director, and through the semester we're going to see a screwball comedy from Howard Hawks and a film noir from Howard Hawks. He also did a Marilyn Monroe movie that we're not going to talk about in class. So pretty interesting director. We don't talk about a lot of directors in this class. As I've said before, we tend to talk about producers. But in Howard Hawks' case, there is one of our directors. And he's playing an Italian, Tony Camonte, a.k.a. Scarface. You can kind of see the scar there. He doesn't look quite as much like Al Capone as Edward G. Robinson does. But it's a great story. It's a great story arc, the rise and fall, right? The rise and fall, all three of these movies, they start with the gangsters kind of at the low end, just one of the guys, and they rise to the top. Often they take out the boss, right? That's one of the problems you get in these sorts of situations where the people are so power hungry. They take out the person above them. Interestingly, George Lucas even borrowed that with his Sith and so on, usually killing the one above them so they can take power and control. That's part of the whole Star Wars formula, going all the way back to the gangster movies. And the gangster movies were another thing that George Lucas would have studied in college. He went to film school, he would have seen these movies, and he borrowed an awful lot from these movies. We'll talk about George Lucas a little bit more when we get into serials and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about him a little bit more with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and so on. Okay, back to gangsters. Some real gangsters. There's that figure, 65 guys. I had it on the tip of my tongue. 65 gangster movies in 2 years. Oh my God. A winning formula until it's all gone, right? Just keep milking the cow till it's dry. And here just are some real life gangsters. This isn't going to be on the test or anything like that, but I just thought you might be kind of interested. We've seen Al Capone, Scarface. This is Lucky Luciano, and he apparently was the inspiration for The Godfather. And he lasted quite a long time. He didn't get bumped off or whatever. The government did get him, I believe. They sent him back to Sicily, which is kind of interesting. And Meyer Lansky, he was Jewish, right? I told you there were not just Italian gangsters, but there were Jewish and Irish gangsters as well that they have made films about. The Italian ones are the famous ones, thanks to Goodfellas and The Godfather and all that. But yeah, there were others. Legs Diamond, I can't remember his name, but I love these nicknames. And Bugsy Siegel. And to be, and we have Bugs Bunny, and I've linked to a Bugs Bunny cartoon because Bugs Bunny also worked at Warner Brothers, if you can call it that. And one of the things that the studios did was they sort of publicized their own movies, and they would allow their animation department to do caricatures and parodies of their own actors. So we will see Bugs Bunny with the cartoon version of Edward G. Robinson, talking tough, see here, guys, yeah, see. And they would do Cagney and others. And if you want to have a little fun, you can search around and see other Hollywood stars animated. Anyway, there we go with real gangster Charles Lucky Luciano. And this is fairly early on. He didn't die an early death, but somewhere into the 40s or 50s, I think he was still going. There we go. Gangsters 2 to Bugs Bunny. You can check out Racketeer Rabbit with Edward G. Robinson and Peter Lorre. We haven't met Peter Lorre yet. We will see him when we get to film noir. And very clearly, Edward G. Robinson. Oh, let's just do a real quick. There he is. And there he is. Okay. Anyway, Bugs Moran, Bugsy Siegel, Bugs Bunny. I guess if you were Buggy, it was sort of like you were crazy, kind of wacky, kind of crazy. And I guess that, that guy's Buggy or that guy's Bugs or something like that. It was sort of a slang for being a little crazy, I think. Thus, Bugs Bunny, 1940. I think they created him in 1940. And that's a fun cartoon. And there are others as well. You can search around, but I've linked to Racketeer Rabbit. I thought it might be kind of fun. Don't worry, this isn't going to be on the test, and it's in your syllabus too, but slang is very interesting to me. Once you get a little up in years and you use some old term, groovy or something like that, and people look at you and you know you're not quite so current anymore, and that's fine, right? That's fine. It means you've lasted, I guess. It means you've lasted and got a few years. So slang and language in general changes when we think of Shakespeare and that language as English, but it certainly isn't the kind of English we speak today, 400 years later. And so from the 1920s and 1930s, that's like 100 years ago, and language has changed. Even, like I say, it's changed since the 1960s, since the groovy days of the 1960s, and it's certainly changed even more since the 20s and 30s and 40s. And so some older movies are going to be a little hard to understand. You might not know what they mean about mugs and dames and all that kind of stuff. So I threw this together. Mall would gangster's woman, dame, and that's from German, Damen, right? So that's an easy one. Flapper, those are party girls like Clara Bow and the cartoon character Betty Boop. I think maybe dancing, sort of flapping their arms, dancing, doing the Charleston. Gams are a woman's legs. Fresh, don't be fresh, right? That would be impertinent. Maybe a man would say something to a woman that was a little out of order, out of line. She might say, hey, don't be fresh. And we'll get that in the Marilyn Monroe film that we have coming up very shortly, because it's a gangster movie. Gangster, part of a gang, really no more than that. The rackets, illegal gang activity. He's involved in the rackets. A goon squad, okay, the gangster's hitman. A mug would be a guy, hey you mugs, or a guy's face, like a mug shot. That's what you get when you get a mug shot for being arrested and all that. I'm not sure why. I don't know on that one. I do know gumshoe because police and detectives had rubber-soled shoes rather than leather-soled shoes. Not sure exactly why. Maybe for sneaking around, maybe because they were cheaper, but gumshoe would be like a detective. Copper, because they had copper buttons. It wasn't really derogatory, it's just they had copper buttons, and they say, hey, copper, way back in the 1880s, 1890s, copper, and then cops and robbers and things like that. Flatfoot, okay, G-man, government agent. From the Prohibition, we get speakeasies, okay, an illegal saloon, and you would speak easy. Joe sent me, right? You'd whisper, right? You'd go down an alleyway. Usually, you'd go down an alleyway and not do the special knock on the door, right? You do the special knock, and somebody would open a little slit in the door, and you'd give the password, right? You'd speak easy. Bootleggers. I think people used to hide alcohol in their boots. Anyway, someone involved in illegal alcohol would be a bootlegger. A gin joint would be a bar or a saloon. Bathtub gin, again, making it sometimes at home in your own bathtub. Money, great terms for money. Dough, moolah. I like rubber checks. That is a bounced check. A bounced check is returned for insufficient funds, thus a bounced check. That's kind of fun. They're really kind of creative. Killing. Oh boy, there are so many ways. Take him for a ride, and they're going to have a little fun with that with Bugs Bunny. That he's going to say, take him for a ride, and Bugs is going to put on an old-fashioned riding outfit that people would wear around the turn of the century. Go out motoring. Anyway, rub you out. Curtains. Curtains, I think, because they have curtains in funeral parlors. It's curtains for you. Clip him, okay, plug him, mow you down, okay, great. I like necktie party, isn't that great? A hanging and the big sleep, that is death. Guns, Tommy gun would be a Thompson submachine gun, and Scarface is going to be very happy. Hey, look, fellas, they got machine guns you can carry, and he's very excited, just like a little boy with his new toy. He's got a Tommy gun, and I've linked to that scene. Chopper is a machine gun. Hand me that chopper. packing heat. A gat is also a gun. And if you talk to the police, then you are a stool pigeon or a dirty rat or a dirty yellow rat. Okay, yellow, I don't know why exactly. Dirty yellow rat, ratch out. Stoolie, sometimes you're a stoolie, stool pigeon. Shake a leg, let's go. Yella, he's yella, scared, afraid. Anyway, a little bit of fun, and that's just mostly with gangster related. We will hear some of these terms when we get into musicals. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the slang when we get into musicals. It's not quite Shakespeare, but if you really want to understand the movie, or I want you to be able to understand the movie and appreciate the films that we watch. And so sometimes things are so long ago that they need a little explanation. Okay, not quite so long ago is Some Like It Hot, which is about gangsters in the Roaring '20s. And it's directed by Billy Wilder, wonderful director. Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis right there, and Jack Lemmon in drag. Okay, that's a term. They are in drag to escape the mob. They witness the St. Valentine's Day massacre. It's a real massacre that took place in Chicago on February 14th, 1929. And one gang went into a garage, sort of like a gas station type garage where you could get work done on your car or leave your car or something like that. And that was where the gangsters hung out and playing cards and whatnot. And one mob knew that the other guys were going to be there. They came in and they gunned them all down. So that is referenced in Scarface. I don't think I could get the link to it, but if you watch the movie as if you track it down and rent it or something like that, Scarface, it's a wonderful movie. First off, it's got this wonderful X running through it, so when people are about to die, you'll see a shadow of an X from a telephone pole or something like that, or a shadow. One of them takes place in a bowling alley, and somebody gets a strike, and thus you get an X. You can look for that if you watch Scarface. But they do the St. Valentine's Day massacre in the movie Scarface, which is really only just a couple years after it actually happened, 4 years after it actually happened. And then here in Some Like It Hot, we get a comedy version of it with our gangster, played by George Raft, who actually was a gangster in the movies in the 1930s. So one of the fun things about this film is they get a lot of people who were in the movies from the 19th. Now, they're not the leads. They're not the leads like these three are. But they got Joan Blondell, who was in a number of gangster movies and musicals. And they got George Raft and a few other people. And audiences of 1959, if they were a little older, they would have recognized easily the actors from 25 years earlier. So they were having a little bit of fun in the casting department for that film. Both of them are going to be in drag. Here, he steals this outfit here. They have met the Marilyn Monroe character, Sugar Cane, and some wonderful lines. Boy, some wonderful lines in this movie. She's gonna, when they meet her, they're gonna be on the run, right? They're on the run from the mob, hiding out as females, and they're going to join an all-female orchestra. They're musicians, and so they're going to join an all-female orchestra, and of course it's you can see it coming from a mile away. Marilyn Monroe is beautiful. They're not going to remain females throughout the entire movie, and Tony Curtis's character, he's going to steal the clothes and pretend to be the rich oil millionaire, and he's going to point out to sea and say, "See that yacht? That's my yacht." And of course, Marilyn Monroe's Sugar Cane is going to believe it, of course. Anyway, there's a couple of fun lines in the movie at the very beginning. They're playing in an orchestra in a speakeasy, and Jack Lemmon's character is going to be what if, you know, well, we got to pay our bills, we're going to get some money, and he says, why do you have to be so negative? What if the Dodgers leave Brooklyn? What if the stock market crashes? What if Douglas Fairbanks divorces Mary Pickford? And of course, they all happened. And the audience in 1959 would have known that, and they would have been in on the gag. It might be a little long ago for some of us, but back in 1959, he's sort of letting us in on the gag. And so they're going to be on the run. They're going to run into Sugar, and she's going to say, it used to be Sugar Kowalczyk. I come from a musical family. My mother was a piano teacher, and my father was a conductor. And they're going to ask, oh, really? Where did he conduct? And she's going to say, on the Baltimore and Ohio. Well, the Baltimore and Ohio is a railroad, not an orchestra. So you might not have gotten that gag. Maybe if you play Monopoly, I can't remember if it's in Monopoly or not. I think it's the B&O Railroad in Monopoly. Anyway, that's the gag, and they're going to cut to them sort of making a funny face. Her father, the conductor. And really a wonderful film. You can watch it for extra credit. It's probably the funniest movie ever made, I think. On some lists, it is. So you can check that out. A wonderful film, and that hotel is the Hotel del Coronado, and it's down in San Diego. If you should find yourself down in San Diego, you can check it out. There's the real thing. In the movie, the hotel's in Florida. They go from Chicago south to Florida, but of course they shoot the movie out here in California. There is the actual Hotel del Coronado. If you go there, maybe when restrictions are lifted and things like that, you can get extra credit for it. Oh, and there's our 1930s Air Stars George Rapp. Spats, Columbo. Spats are these white things that go over your shoelaces. It's sort of formal wear, like they might wear in a wedding or something like that. And that's his nickname. That's not his real name. That's his nickname, Spats. Columbo, and Pat O'Brien as police officer, Joe Blundell. And that is our brief look at Gangsters. Kind of a short class, but that's okay. That would hit in IRL. In real life, that would have come after you would have taken the first test. And so you would take the first test before this lecture, include this on the second test, and yeah, that's it. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Gangsters. Next up, we have lots of wonderful stuff coming up, musicals and horror and great stuff. I love this section of the class. It's my favorite section of the class, with all of the genres and things. So these next, really the rest of the semester, I think it's just fantastic. I love talking about the genre films. So anyway, until then, thank you so much for joining me, and see you next time.